video, we're going to be talking about ecosystem basics. Ecosystem boundaries are not clearly defined. We generally define an ecosystem by the range of an organism, where that organism utilizes its area. We can classify ecosystems according to topographical features or a host of other parameters. Ecosystems can overlap. So again, there is no set boundary of where ecosystems start and stop. We generally do define biomes as a place where the general climate, weather patterns, topographical features are similar. And within those biomes, you generally will have overlapping ecosystems. The ecosystem will generally be the area of interest of where you're looking, the area of a particular organism or group of organisms. The combination of all of the ecosystems, all of the biomes on Earth, then make up the biosphere. So the biosphere is essentially where all the living things on Earth are living. So the Earth is essentially the biosphere. That biosphere can then be broken down into biomes, ecosystems, and within that ecosystem you may have several communities, and communities are different populations, and the populations are basically all of the same type of organism. So you might have several populations of organisms coming together to create a community. And then within those populations, you have the individual species. Let's take a quick look at photosynthesis. Here is the overall equation. Here is the equation for photosynthesis. We are taking water and carbon dioxide and we are shifting them into sugar and oxygen. So the point of photosynthesis is to make this sugar here. What we're doing is we're taking light energy and transforming it into chemical energy. The way that we're doing this is we're taking energy from the sun to take this carbon dioxide and shove a whole bunch of them together to make our sugar. So the carbon dioxide directly is related to that sugar that is made in the end. Oxygen just happens to be a happy byproduct when the plant or the photosynthesizer takes apart this oxygen so that way you can get more of the hydrogen to kind of replace parts of the chlorophyll as it's going through its transfer process. So the water then creates the oxygen, which happens to be a happy byproduct. It's not the point of photosynthesis. The point of photosynthesis is this sugar here, where the oxygen is a happy byproduct. Yes, we do need it. It is very, very needed in the photosynthesis cell respiration, but the overall point of the photosynthesis is to get this sugar, okay? So essentially what the plant is doing is taking air, carbon dioxide, and turning it into the building blocks for itself, that sugar. And truly, with photosynthesis, there's more than just sugar that can be made by the made in the end, but as a general all over, but in a generality, that sugar is basically the building block for the plant. So then when we look at cellular respiration, we're going to take these products as the reactants for cellular respiration. So let's take a look at cell respiration. Cell respiration, we are taking that sugar, C6H12O6, and oxygen. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor on the electron transport chain, which is part of the cellular respiration. And then with that, we are going to be essentially taking apart this sugar to give us back that carbon dioxide. And then we get some leftover water. Now this overall equation, so we have the sugar, and what we're doing is we're ripping the carbons off of the sugar, and in that process we are breaking bonds, creating cellular energy in the form of ATP. And the byproduct of that is the carbon dioxide, which we then breathe out. And the oxygen is the final electron acceptor. It's accepting hydrogen electrons from the system, and the oxygen then gives us that water. So the outs of the photosynthesis give us the products of cell respiration. The outs of the cell respiration give us the ins of the photosynthesis. Now, something to remember is that plants also do this. So they also need some of the sugar and some of the oxygen that they create themselves from photosynthesis. So they keep some behind for themselves before they give off the extras for the rest of us to use. Now, let's take a look at food chains and food webs and looking at the energy transfer between organisms. Food chains start with our producers. Our producers are also called autotrophs. These are going to be our photosynthesizers or chemosynthesizers. So photosynthesizers do photosynthesis, they utilize the light. In some areas of the earth, there's no light, so they cannot do photosynthesis, and they use chemicals instead. So if you think of like the bottom of the ocean, in deep dark caves where there might not be a producer that can utilize light, there are producers that can utilize different chemicals in the environment in order to create their chemical energy. So our producers are going to use photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. So then our primary consumer, that means primary, is going to be eating these producers. Whenever we are showing the transfer of energy through a food web or a food chain, our arrows are going from the food to the eater, so they're pointing the direction of energy. The energy is going from the producer to the consumer, so our arrow is going to go into that direction. We call each of these levels a trophic level. So producer is our first trophic level. Our second trophic level will be consumers. And then a secondary consumer is one that eats a primary consumer. And then we have tertiary consumer. And in case you want to spell that. And then rarely we might have a quaternary consumer. And again, in case you want it for spelling. So as you go up trophic levels, less and less energy becomes available for each trophic level. Only about 10% of the energy is passed on from trophic level to trophic level, so meaning 90% energy is lost. Energy that's lost often in a trophic cascade is going to be through heat loss. Not always, but a lot of energy lost as you go through a food chain is going to be through heat. But there is also use in other types of energy it can go into. So as you go up the food chain, less and less energy, so you generally don't have a whole lot of organisms up here, and you have more organisms down here. And that is because there's more energy available here, so the primary consumer is going to be getting more energy from the producer than a secondary is going to be getting from a primary. And just a reminder, something that eats primarily plants is going to be a herbivore. Something that is going to be eating another organism that's not a plant is going to be a carnivore. And something that eats both other, essentially, either animals or insects, and it also eats the producers is called an omnivore. Organisms can be on multiple levels. So if it is an omnivore, it might be considered a secondary consumer if it's eating, let's say, an insect, but it could also, if it also eats plants, it could also be a primary consumer. So just because it's on one level in one food chain, in the grand food web, it might be on multiple levels. So when you're drawing a food web, they're not going to necessarily be in a nice straight line because organisms eat generally more than one food source. So they might be on different levels depending on the food chain that you're looking at. Other organisms that we do need to look at are detritivores and decomposers. These type of organisms don't fall within the traditional food chain of a producer or primary, secondary, tertiary consumer. What they do is kind of the recycling of the food chain. So detritivores basically eat the dead stuff. Decomposers are going to be organisms like fungus and bacteria that take the essential waste and break it down into smaller elements. So a decomposer does more breaking down than just eating the dead stuff. The decomposer is going to be actually breaking it down further into smaller elements. Some ecosystems are more productive than others, and we can measure this with gross primary productivity. Gross primary productivity is essentially all of the photosynthesis and cellular respiration that our producers do. In order to get the amount of photosynthesis product that's available for the rest of the ecosystem, we take our gross primary productivity and we subtract out the respiration that happens in the producer. So as I said earlier, the producer keeps some of that sugar and oxygen for itself to do its own respiration. So if we subtract that matter out from the gross primary productivity, we're going to get our net primary productivity. So this is what's available for the rest of the ecosystem to utilize. So we often measure the productivity by taking what plants or what producers make, what they utilize for themselves, take that out, and that gives us what's left over. Some ecosystems are going to be more productive than others. Most productivity is going to be happening at the equator, where there's sunshine most of the time. Also generally along coastlines and in the ocean. Think of a desert. The desert's going to have very low productivity. So that is how we measure our productivity. This is an equation that you will need to know for the exam. And that is ecosystem basics. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.